The mill that never stopped. Look up at the skyline of New York City, the Chrysler Building, Madison Square Garden, the bones of the George Washington Bridge. The steel holding all of it together did not come from Pittsburgh. It did not come from Cleveland. It came from a small town in eastern Pennsylvania, along a river most Americans have never heard of. It came from a mill that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for nearly a century. A mill that employed 30,000 people at its peak. A mill that launched more ships in World War II than any builder in the history of the country. A mill that, in 1958, paid 6 of the 10 highest compensated executives in the entire United States. A mill that is gone. The blast furnaces shut off in 1995. The company filed for bankruptcy in 2001. The assets were auctioned off in 2003. What stands on the site today is a casino and an art center. That is what is left of Bethlehem Steel, the second largest steel producer in American history, the company that built the modern Skyline, stripped to the concrete and sold for parts. This is how it happened. The iron company that refused to die. April 8, 1857. South Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a man named Augustus Wole launches the Saucona Iron Company along the banks of the Lehigh River. The country is in the middle of a financial panic. Banks are failing across the East Coast. The timing is terrible. The company survives anyway. Within a few years, it has a new name, the Bethlehem Iron Company, and a new purpose. It is feeding steel rails to the railroads expanding across America. By 1873, Bethlehem Iron becomes one of the first companies in the United States to use the Bessemer process, the industrial method that converts molten pig iron into steel. Before Bessemer, you made iron. After Bessemer, you made something 16 times more durable. The railroads needed that durability. So did the Navy. By the late 1880s, Bethlehem Iron has completed the first heavy forging plant in the United States. It is delivering gun forgings and armor plating to the United States Navy. The company is not yet a giant, but it is becoming the kind of company that empires are built on. In 1899, the company reorganizes as the Bethlehem Steel Company. 5 years later, everything changes. A man named Charles M. Schwab walks through the door. Schwab is not a stranger to steel. He had started as an engineer and stake driver at Andrew Carnegie's steelworks in Braddock, Pennsylvania. He worked his way up fast. By 1897, he was president of Carnegie Steel. In 1901, he helped negotiate the secret sale of Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan, who turned it into United States Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in the world. Schwab became president of that too. Then, he grew frustrated with the board. He resigned. He came back to Bethlehem. In December 1904, Schwab formed the Bethlehem Steel Corporation and became its first president and chairman. He told his secretary when making the decision to bet everything on a new and unproven product, "I've thought the whole thing over, and if we are going bust, we will go bust big." That product was a beam, a simple steel beam, and it changed everything. The beam that built the Skyline. The problem with building tall was not ambition, it was weight. Traditional I-beams were narrow at the flange. They were heavy, they were expensive, and there was a ceiling on how high you could realistically stack a structure built with them. An engineer named Henry Gray had patented a different approach in 1897. A wide flange beam, an H-beam, lighter than the old design, broader at the top and bottom, cheaper to produce, structurally superior under load. United States Steel had looked at the Gray process and passed. Schwab looked at it and bet the company. In December 1905, Bethlehem announced it would build a Gray rolling mill. In January 1908, the first commercially successful wide flange structural shapes made in America came out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The first major project built with those beams was Gimbel's department store in New York City, which consumed 12,000 tons of Bethlehem steel. Then the commission started stacking up. The Chrysler Building, the Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, Madison Square Garden, Alcatraz. By 1940, approximately 80% of the New York City skyline had been built with Bethlehem steel. Bethlehem's chief engineer would later say it plainly. Bethlehem was king in Manhattan. That was not a boast. That was a fact, stamped in steel across the skyline of the most photographed city on Earth. Schwab hired a young electrical engineer named Eugene Grace to manage Bethlehem's growth in 1916. The two men, working together over the next 2 decades, took the company from less than 1% of national ingot capacity in 1905 to the second largest steel producer in the world in fewer than 35 years. That sentence deserves a second reading. From less than 1% of the market to second in the world in 35 years. During the same period, Bethlehem Steel also became the largest shipbuilding enterprise in America, acquiring shipyards from Massachusetts to California. Before World War I, the company had already begun circumventing American neutrality laws by funneling munitions to Allied governments in Europe through middlemen in Canada. The British government placed a single order worth $135 million, the largest contract in company history to that point. When that war ended, Bethlehem had become one of the largest companies in the world, the arsenal of democracy. In September 1939, Eugene Grace was playing golf at the Saucon Valley Country Club in Pennsylvania when a caddy ran out to his foursome with a message. World War II had just begun. Grace looked at his partners, all Bethlehem vice presidents, and said, "Gentlemen, we are going to make a lot of money." He was not wrong. Within weeks of the United States entering the war, Bethlehem Steel had over $1.3 billion in orders for ammunition, battleships, aircraft, and bomb casings. The company's total employment went from 13,055 workers at the main Bethlehem plant before the war to 31,523 by 1943. Across all its facilities and shipyards, the company employed as many as 300,000 people during the war years. Bethlehem Shipbuilding Corporation's 15 shipyards produced a total of 1,121 ships during World War II, more than any other builder in the country, and nearly 1/5 of the entire two-ocean United States Navy fleet. Historians credit Bethlehem's capacity to build warships quickly as a decisive factor in American victory. Bethlehem ranked 7th among all United States corporations in the total value of its wartime production contracts. The mill along the Lehigh River was not just a business, it was a weapon, and it helped win a war. The post-war years were extraordinary. The devastation of World War II had flattened the industrial capacity of Europe and Japan. American steel had no real competition. Bethlehem and United States Steel could charge almost any price they wanted. When one raised prices, the other followed. Labor demanded wage increases. Management accepted them, passed the cost to buyers, and everyone went home richer. By 1958, 6 of the 10 highest compensated corporate executives in the United States were employees of Bethlehem Steel. The chairman, Arthur B. Homer, earned $511,249 in total compensation that year, the single largest executive pay package in the country. The hallways of corporate Bethlehem, as one former legal staff member later recalled, were said to be lined with gold, and when you became employed, they gave you a pick to mine the gold. The plant in Bethlehem covered 1,800 acres. It stretched 4 miles along the Lehigh River. It housed 900 overhead electrical cranes. It ran on 400 miles of internal railroad track. At its peak, it never stopped. Not for weekends, not for holidays, not ever. The furnaces ran, the beams came out, the city bought more. The strike that changed everything. Then came 1959, and the world Bethlehem Steel had built began to crack. The 1959 steel strike lasted 116 days. The United Steelworkers of America walked out across the entire industry. Production halted. The customers who needed steel did not wait. They looked abroad. Steel imports into the United States jumped from 2 million tons in 1958 to 5 million tons in 1959. Those customers who went looking overseas to fill the gap found something they had not expected. Japanese steel, West German steel, cheaper than American steel, sometimes significantly cheaper. The strike eventually ended. Most of the big customers came back, but not all of them, and the ones who came back knowing now that there were other options. Bethlehem's general manager at the Johnstown plant described what happened next. The big customers returned, but the company started losing smaller product lines. nails, fencing, wire, to foreign manufacturers who could undercut American prices at the dock. Belgian barbed wire, he said, was being delivered on the docks at Baltimore at less money than it cost us to make it. The manufacturing of steel in the United States never again reached its before 1959 levels. Not then. Not ever. The problem was not only external, it was structural. Bethlehem's executive culture had calcified. The nepotism that ran through the company since Schwab's earliest days had built a management class that had never been tested by genuine adversity. During the boom years, no one needed to adapt. When one company raised prices, everyone raised prices. When labor demanded more, everyone paid more and charged more. The closed loop had worked for 30 years. It stopped working the moment price competition arrived from outside. A former Bethlehem employee summarized the dysfunction precisely. Who in the hell needed 12 vice presidents making $500,000 a year? The structure that had made Bethlehem rich was the same structure making it slow, bloated, and incapable of responding to a market that had permanently changed. On September 30th, 1977, Bethlehem Steel called it Black Friday. 2,500 white-collar workers were laid off across the company in a single day. That year, the company lost $448 million, its first losing year since 1933. The foreign steel that had started as 5% of the market in 1959 had grown into something that could not be ignored. Japanese mills, rebuilt from rubble after the war with American foreign aid and newer technology, were producing steel with more efficient modern processes at lower labor costs. European mills were doing the same. The integrated steel companies of Pennsylvania and Ohio, the giants who had never had to compete, were now competing against manufacturers who had started fresh while American companies had simply kept doing what had always worked. In 1982, Bethlehem Steel posted a loss of $1.5 billion and suspended most of its steelmaking operations. In a single year, $1.5 billion. The company returned to profitability briefly in 1988, but it never regained what it had been. The shutdowns continued through the late 1980s and into the 1990s. Mini-mills, smaller, leaner competitors using electric arc furnaces to melt scrap steel, had entered the structural beam market by the late 1980s. The construction industry was also changing. Lower-rise buildings, lighter construction methods, new materials. The heavy structural grades of steel that Bethlehem had built its reputation on were in declining demand. The world had moved on. Bethlehem had not. The long collapse. In 1991, the company discontinued its coal mining operations. In 1992, it closed the Johnstown plants. In 1993, it exited the railroad car business, a division it had run for 70 years. In 1995, on November 18th, the blast furnaces at the main Bethlehem plant went cold for the last time. The 5 furnaces that had run along the Lehigh River, the A furnace dating back to 1915, the 2 largest reaching over 230 feet into the Pennsylvania sky, were shut down. After nearly 140 years of continuous metal production in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the mill went silent. In 1997, Bethlehem ceased all shipbuilding activities, ending a capability that had helped defeat the Axis powers. A union leader named Jerry Green, who had worked for Bethlehem for 27 years, said what many were thinking. "I never would have believed it in my wildest dreams. I thought Bethlehem was a giant and steel was king." The restructuring did not save the company. It only slowed the bleeding. On October 15, 2001, Bethlehem Steel Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The board had approved the plan the previous Sunday, a turnaround expert named Robert S. Miller, who had led the financial rescue of Chrysler years earlier, had taken over as chief executive only 3 weeks before. He was brought in to negotiate. He filed instead. Bethlehem was the 25th American steelmaking company to file for bankruptcy in the 4 years between 1998 and 2001. 25th, not a single company, not an unlucky outlier. The entire industry was collapsing, one name at a time, across the same decade. Miller was direct about what had happened. The company could not overcome the economic damage caused by low-cost imports and a slowing economy, despite nearly $300 million in net cost reductions since 1998. Chapter 11 does not solve our problems. he said. "It provides us a process and framework within which we can address and explore the significant issues facing the company." The language was careful. The reality was simple. Bethlehem Steel had been dying for 20 years. The filing was the paperwork that made it official. The pension that 95,000 retired steelworkers had been promised, the retirement that had been part of every labor contract, the reward for decades inside those furnaces, was transferred to the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, a federal insurance program that covers failed pension plans. The Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation pays out, but it pays out less. Retirees who had spent careers at Bethlehem lost portions of the benefits they had been guaranteed. The Bethlehem spokeswoman confirmed the filing with words that had the weight of everything those furnaces had meant. "It's a sad, painful event." Is this how people who worked for Bethlehem Steel envisioned it would end? No, it's not. In 2003, Bethlehem Steel was dissolved. Its remaining assets, 6 massive plants, including Sparrows Point in Maryland and Burns Harbor in Indiana, were sold to the International Steel Group of Cleveland for $1.5 billion. 2 years after that, International Steel Group was acquired by Mittal Steel. A year after that, Mittal merged with the European giant Arcelor to become ArcelorMittal. The mills along the Lehigh River and the Patapsco River and the Indiana shoreline, the mills that had forged the skeleton of 20th century America, were now owned by a company headquartered in Luxembourg. American ownership of Bethlehem Steel's assets ended in 2005, 48 years after the 1959 strike that started the clock. What was left? The 163 acres where the main Bethlehem plant once stood are now called steel stacks. The 5 blast furnaces still rise over the site. They were too expensive to demolish and too significant to hide. The largest 2 reach over 230 feet. The A furnace dates to 1915. They stand as monuments now, lit up at night for concerts and festivals. Arts Quest, a nonprofit arts organization, runs events on the site year-round. A casino, Wind Creek Bethlehem, was built on the property that once housed the plant's steelmaking operations. More than 1 million people visit steel stacks every year. The Sparrows Point facility in Maryland, once the largest working steel mill in the world, went silent for good in 2012. Today, it is a logistics hub. Amazon warehouses sit where the blast furnaces once stood. The people who worked at Sparrows Point watched the blast furnace demolished. One resident described it. "We watched the blast furnace where our parents worked be blown up. That thing fell over like a big lump. And so did our hearts." 4 different companies tried to make steel at Sparrows Point after Bethlehem left. All 4 failed. This is what the collapse of a century-old industrial company looks like from the outside. A casino where the furnaces were. A logistics hub where the ships were built. Pension checks that come in smaller than promised. And 5 blast furnaces standing in a field in Pennsylvania, lit up at night with colored lights so that people who were not born when the steel was running can take photographs of something they no longer quite understand. The mill that built Manhattan did not go quietly. It took 40 years to die. It fought for every year. It restructured, divested, laid off, and rationalized until there was nothing left to cut that would make the numbers work. The forces that killed it? Cheap foreign labor, rebuilt foreign capacity, rising domestic wages, a management culture that had never learned to compete because it never had to. Those forces had been set in motion before the first foreign ton of steel crossed an American dock. They had been set in motion by success, by decades of oligopoly pricing and union contracts and executive gold mines that assumed the good times were permanent. They were not permanent. They never are. Somewhere in Pennsylvania tonight, the blast furnaces that ran from 1863 to 1995 are standing dark against the sky. They are not producing anything. They are not scheduled to. The company that built them has been dissolved for more than 20 years. The beams those furnaces helped produce are still holding up buildings in New York, still carrying the weight of bridges across rivers, still doing exactly what Charles Schwab bet the company they could do when he said in 1905 that if they were going bust, they would go bust big. He was right about the beams. He could not have imagined what going bust big actually looked like 96 years later when the whole company went to auction and a Luxembourg conglomerate bought the pieces for $1.5 billion and American ownership of Bethlehem Steel passed out of existence without ceremony. The mill that built Manhattan had become the mill that got stripped for scrap. Not quickly, not carelessly, slowly, systematically. One closure at a time, across a generation, until the name meant something different than it used to, and no one left in the building remembered what it used to mean. That is how you lose a company built on iron. Not in a single bad year, in 1,000 decisions made during the good ones. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it tells us to keep making videos like this one. Subscribe if you are new here. We cover the companies, the industries, and the decisions that shape the world you live in, and a lot of them did not end the way anyone planned. There is another one on the screen right now. We will see you there.